You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Sharanjit Lail in Singapore. The headlines: a stark warning about climate change as a UN summit opens. Experts say the threat posed by rising temperatures has never been worse.
Destruction in so many places, suffering, a lot of suffering derived from the consequences of climate change.
A ceasefire in the trade war between the US and China. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping put punishing tariffs on hold for now.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also in the programme, our worst riots in Paris for decades. President Macron's government promises tough action against anyone who resorted to violence. And down on one knee, then down the drain. New York reunites the couple whose engagement ring fell down a grate in Times Square.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Well, good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London and 2 a.m. in the Polish city of Katowice, where just a few hours ago the United Nations gave a stark warning about climate change. Patrycja Espinosa opened the latest gathering called to try to find a solution to the problem by telling delegates that the threat posed to humanity by rising temperatures has never been worse. Have a listen.
The effects that are happening are being affecting communities around the world, casualties, destruction in so many places, suffering, a lot of suffering derived from the consequences of climate change. Just make it, really make our work more urgent.
A tough message there from the United Nations, but it seems it isn't necessarily getting through. Cutting back on the use of fossil fuels like oil and coal is seen as vital if we want to reduce emissions which contribute to climate change. But in Poland, the host for this summit, that's just not happening. Our environment correspondent David Shukman has more.
A mountain of coal lies freshly dug at a mine, one of many here in southern Poland, at the centre of arguments over what to do about global warming. Okay, so we're on our way down. Oh, I'm starting to feel the air pressure on my ears now. Our first sight of the mining process. This coal is used to make steel, but most is burned by electricity. We reach a tangle of cables and pipes, and the rock above us keeps shifting.
Właśnie ma pierwszy raz przecież. This is literally the coal face, and despite that spray of water, it's amazingly dusty around here, very noisy, a really hostile place to work. And because coal can be so polluting, many countries, including Britain, have moved away from it. But here in Poland, thousands of people work in the coal mines. Coal is a mainstay of the Polish economy. So while climate scientists say the world should move away from coal, here it looks set to last for decades.
Stanowiska pracy by zostały pozamykane nie tylko w kopalniach, ale w dużych przedsiębiorstwach, które operują z kopalniami. Bardzo dużo stanowisk zostało zamkniętych.
But back at the surface, one green campaigner offers a different vision of clean solar power. He knows he's outnumbered here.
Burning coal, burning fossil fuels, using fossil fuels in the energy sector, it is a source of huge CO2 emissions, and it hurts our climate, it hurts our planet.
This region has some of the dirtiest air in Europe. something that'll focus minds as the climate get underway. David Shukman, BBC News in Poland.
Well, so from those talks in Katowice to the recent G20 summit, because China's President Xi Jinping is making the most of his trip to Argentina for that G20 summit by extending his visit to sign some trade deals. President Mauricio Macri was once again his host. The two leaders once again shook hands just days after they exchanged similar formalities. That meeting failed to reach agreement on key issues, but Mr. Xi and his host seemed happy with their own arrangements.
I would say that we had an excellent meeting, during which we revisited all of the projects we have in common. Unfortunately, it is a long agenda, and we always have to benefit Argentines as much as the Chinese.
Although China and Argentina are far apart, the two countries have always adhered to the spirit of mutual respect, trust and win-win cooperation, so we become strategic partners and good friends.
Also making news today, President Trump's unique approach to diplomacy is in the spotlight once again after he told the South Korean President Moon Jae-in, after he revealed details of a conversation with the US leader about North Korea. Mr. Moon told reporters that Mr. Trump had asked him to pass on a message to Kim Jong-un, and that message was that the American president had very favorable views towards the North Korean leader and that he likes him. A senior member of Theresa May's cabinet has warned that if the British Parliament fails to support her Brexit deal, the UK could either leave with no agreement or even not leave at all. The Environment Secretary Michael Gove, who campaigned for Britain to leave the EU, said that while the deal on offer wasn't ideal, there was no better alternative.
This deal, of course, is not perfect, but it does provide those of us who campaigned to leave with an opportunity to take back control of our borders and have control of our immigration policy. It means that we end the huge automatic sums that go to the EU every week, and it gives us the capacity in huge sectors of our economy to diverge if we think that's right.
The number of people still missing following last month's wildfires in California has fallen to just 25. The death toll is unchanged at 88, and it now seems that many of those who fled their homes have finally reported their whereabouts to authorities. Now, how's this for a story of lost and found? If you see that image in the middle, that's Daniela and John. They're a couple from the UK, and this happened just after John proposed to Daniela in Manhattan. However, the engagement ring fell down a grate and they couldn't find it. They returned back to the UK fearing that they'd lost it forever. But the New York Police Department saw that particular video. Then they recovered the ring, issued an appeal on social media, and they're very much looking forward to reuniting it with its owners. And I'm pleased to say that John and Daniela will be getting it back in time for their wedding. A happy ending.
Now, the US and China have been exchanging ever-increasing tariffs as their trade war gathers pace, but the dispute has now been put on hold after a meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The two leaders agreed to postpone the imposition of the latest round of US import taxes for 90 days to allow time for wide-ranging talks. The White House said it was a highly successful meeting, and Xi Jinping said cooperation was the best choice for both countries. Well, earlier I spoke to Amy Zhuang. She's the chief analyst for Asia at the financial services group Nordea, and I asked her whether it was a win-win agreement for both countries.
Well, clearly, I mean, this is a win-win situation, at least in the next 3 months, while they're working out a deal. And I'm sure that both leaders will go home and declare a win from this truce. And from the China side, Xi Jinping could say that we got the U.S. to postpone further tariffs, and that will give a relief to our economy through the export sector and the manufacturing sector, because the trade war has already bites into the economy and the manufacturing sector. But the U.S., Trump will also go home and basically say, well, China has agreed to buy more products from us, especially agriculture products. So the farmers, his core supporters, will really be happy about this. And then he says that we still have some leverage on China and pressure them. So both sides will declare this a win.
Right, but it's a temporary truce, isn't it? I mean, 90 days doesn't seem like much time to work through a lot of the structural changes that the US is demanding of China, particularly things like intellectual property and, you know, the transfer of technology. So what will they come away with in terms of going forward?
Yeah, that's the interesting part, because this declaration hasn't really come up with any details. What are the terms that the U.S. are expecting to come up, the specific ones, in terms of, you know, how much needs China to do and the timeline, and will China be living up to that? And I guess those details will be probably announced gradually over the next 3 months. But I don't think any agreement as such, and especially not that China will see any meaningful reform progress. And 3 months are just short. But if they both do try to meet each other in the middle within the next 3 months, they could easily postpone further escalations even further into the future. So this is a positive first step, of course.
All right, we know there are already some tariffs in place at the moment, and there's been some impact on both economies. We saw growth in China's manufacturing sector stalling for the first time in November. The US comes out with trade data this week as well. So how has all of this trade war, impacted the world's two largest economies?
Clearly, China has definitely intensified the slowdown that the Chinese economy already seen before the trade war started. But on the U.S., the pressure on inflation, especially on consumer inflation, because they import so many consumer goods from China, I mean, that pressure is also relieving, and that's important just ahead of Christmas time. So I guess both countries can sigh of relief now, but that relief is temporary, and uncertainty remains very high.
Let's turn to Europe, where a huge clear-up operation has been taking place in Paris. It's after the worst civil unrest in France for several decades. More than 400 arrests were made as protesters, calling themselves the Yellow Jackets, clashed with police around some of the city's world-famous landmarks. They want President Macron to scrap his increased taxes on fuel, something that he is adamant he will not do. Lucy Williamson reports.
France's scars are visible today, burnt into its most exclusive streets. The cost of economic conflict, long felt outside the city centres, now being scrubbed inch by inch from the capital's face. Among the targets last night was Yasmin's car. She's not a government representative, but a single parent with 5 children.
I understand the protesters, but the way they are acting right now, no. We are not dying from hunger. We have social care. It's not perfect, but I also work and raise my kids. I suffer from this too.
Last night's violence was unusual for France. Those now flocking to this movement include anarchists and political agitators. President Macron has said that rioters will not be tolerated, but it's not always easy to tell who's who. Even among the many peaceful protesters are those who say France's institutions aren't working and rebellion is overdue. The most popular demand at protest sites around the country: Macron resign. They're cleaning off the graffiti now, but the discontent that sparked this movement is harder to wipe away. President Macron has cast himself as an economic reformer who stands firm against protesters. But when do protesters become simply the French people? Jean will be 70 this month, but he was at the protest here last night too.
If the protest had gone very calmly, Macron would have come back from Argentina and said it's all fine, it'll die down, I'll stick to my position and I won't change anything. It's sad to say, but it's the reality.
President Macron met his government for an urgent meeting today. A spokesman said a state of emergency could be imposed. He was booed even as he came to thank the firemen on duty for the protests. Fresh from the battles of the G20 summit in Argentina, the French president is facing tougher diplomacy at home. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Well, you're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Less cheers for beers. Are Australians falling out of love with alcohol?
Also coming up on the programme, creating real opportunities for disabled people across the world. The World Health Organization pushes to raise awareness of the 1 billion people living with a disability.
It's quite clear that the worst victims of this disaster are the poor people living in the slums which have sprung up around the factory.
I am feeling so helpless that the children are dying in front of me and I can't do.
Charles Manson is the mystical leader of the hippie cult suspected of killing Sharon Tate and at least 6 other people in Los Angeles.
At 11 o'clock this morning, just half a metre of rock separated Britain from continental Europe. It took the drills just a few moments to cut through the final obstacle. Then Philippe Cosette, a miner from Calais, was shaking hands and exchanging flags with Robert Fagg, his opposite number from Dover.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on Newsday. I'm Sharonjit Lail in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories this hour. The UN warns the threat posed to all of us by climate change has never been this serious as a global climate summit opens with a push to cut emissions.
And there's been a ceasefire in the trade war between the US and China as Donald Trump and Xi Jinping put punishing tariffs on hold. And this video from the G20 summit illustrates just how frustrating it can be when you're the host. Argentina's President Macri was greeting Donald Trump when the US leader decided he wasn't going to wait around for any more photographs. Mr. Macri looked a little bit disappointed at his departure. He took a moment to recompose himself before getting ready to greet his next guest. Well, let's take a look at some of the front pages from around the world now, because the G20 summit pretty much dominates most of the coverage from the region. In fact, the South China Morning Post leading with that meeting between China and the US at the G20. This report on President Xi and President Trump, they agreed on a 90-day truce in their trade war. And the Straits Times also features that meeting, describing a global sigh of relief at the outcome. It also touches on Saturday's violent protests in Paris, which it says were the worst France has experienced in decades. And finally, we've got the Japan Times, which has also got the Xi-Trump meeting on its cover. This time, they're warning that Japan is now in President Trump's crosshairs after he agreed a trade war ceasefire with China. It also looks at the G20 meeting between France's President Macron and Japan's Prime Minister Abe, and looks at how the arrest of Renault and Nissan car executive Carlos Ghosn in Japan could put a strain on relations between the two countries. Well, that brings you up to date with some of the papers. Kasia, what are some stories sparking discussions online?
Well, Sharonjit, for boxing fans, there was one must-see fight this weekend in Los Angeles.
All together now. So bye-bye, Miss American Pie. Go my Chevy to
Yes, this was after the fight. This video is of the British heavyweight boxer Tyson Fury, and he is singing after his title fight with America's Deontay Wilder. And this video is really proving popular on BBC.com. He seemed happy enough despite being knocked down twice as the fight ended in a draw. We'll have much more on that and all the day's sports news in Sport Today in around half an hour's time.
Now, 1 billion people live with a disability. That's according to the World Health Organization. It's a huge figure, roughly 15% of the global population, and it's having a profound effect on how society responds. Monday, the 3rd of December, is designated by the United Nations as the International Day of Disabled Persons. Well, Daryl Barrett is the technical lead for disabilities and rehabilitation in the World Health Organization's Western Pacific region. He joins me now from Manila. Now, Daryl, first off, an estimated 1 billion people live with disabilities. First off, tell us what exactly counts as a disability.
Well, good morning, and thanks for your time this morning. Look, that's a really great question. Disability is a complex and evolving concept. It really is about the lack of participation that people experience if they have a health condition or an impairment that interacts with barriers in society. And those barriers could be legislative or policy barriers, they could be the built environment. So it's really about participation, and when people can't participate, they experience disability.
Now, you mentioned those barriers there, of course, experienced by disabled people in many aspects of society. But tell us exactly, how can we overcome them?
Well, I guess the first thing is thinking about disability as a natural part of the human condition. There's a mentality that it's them and us, when actually all of us at some point in our life are likely to experience disability. So the first thing is recognizing that disability, when we address disability, we're really addressing issues for the whole population. And I think another practical way that we can look at addressing those barriers is through implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I mean, that's the latest core human rights treaty, and it's the one that's really guiding countries in order to address the discrimination and stigma that exists.
Right. And is the problem worse in developing countries, where it's estimated some 80% of people with a disability live?
Look, it's no secret that countries need resources in order to address barriers that people with disability face. And, just in our region, you have an incredible diversity of countries. You have well-resourced countries like Australia and Japan, New Zealand. You have economies that are in transition like Vietnam, and then you have Pacific Island countries. And all of them are at different processes and stages, I guess, in addressing these barriers. So, yes, we definitely need resources to address those issues.
Right. And is it always about putting more money, more resources into it, or can other things be done, for instance, a day like today, to recognise the problem?
Always is needed to address barriers, but you're right, we don't only need money. I mean, to address attitudes and stigma, which can often be the biggest barriers for people with disability, it doesn't take a lot of money to look at how we can address disability from the stigma angle and make sure that people are included and not treated in a negative manner because they experience disability.
All right, Daryl Barrett there from the World Health Organization. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Australians have a reputation for being rather fond of alcoholic drinks, but it seems that claim might not be rooted in reality, at least not if you look at official figures, which suggest that consumption has fallen to their lowest levels in decades. According to the research, the average Australian will each year knock back 224 cans of beer and 38 bottles of wine. They will also get through 17 bottles of cider and polish off 4 bottles of spirits. But the same statistics also suggest that 1/5 of the Australian population are teetotal, meaning that they never drink any alcohol at all. Phil Mercer has the story.
Believe it or not, alcohol consumption in fun-loving Australia is at its lowest since the early 1960s. Beer, wine and spirits are still a big part of life here, but in a land with a boozy reputation, it's young people who are drinking less.
I think it's really interesting. I think we have turned a significant corner. Over the last decade, we've progressively seen an improvement in those issues. Less binge drinking, less actually persistent alcohol-related risk amongst younger people. I think we are seeing issues related to lifestyle and living healthier come into play.
Australia's tastes are changing. Small craft brewers say that beer made with native ingredients is becoming more popular as drinkers choose quality over quantity.
People drinking less, but drinking better. So instead of taking their $30 into a pub and saying, I want to get as many beers as I can out of this, they're actually saying, I want to have the best experience that I can. So I'm going to go in and I might only get 2 beers out of this, but I'm going to have an experience. I'm going to taste something, I'm going to hear a story, I'm going to be transported by this beer.
Australians do love to party. For many, drinking is a national pastime, especially on days when there are major sporting events. Beer is widely available and it's relatively cheap. For most, it's just a bit of fun, a social lubricant that helps them to relax. But for others, alcohol has a far darker side.
A march in Sydney has celebrated those trying to conquer their addictions. Alcohol is Australia's most lethal drug. It kills more people each year than all illicit substances. For some, it's a demon that's hard to overcome.
I just knew that I just needed alcohol to make me feel good, give me that confidence, allow me to get out of bed or whatever, just not wanting to live anymore. So recovery's really given me a new gift of life and just the opportunity to be that mum and that person I'm meant to be.
The Australian government recommends no more than 2 standard drinks each day. That plea for moderation appears to be working. Although Australia's love affair with booze might be fading, it's still a place that loves to party. Phil Mercer, BBC News, Sydney.
Interesting insight there. You've been watching Newsday. I'm Kasha Madeira in London.
And I'm Sharanjit Lail in Singapore. Stay with us because coming up we'll be taking a look at the market reaction in the aftermath of the G20 summit. It's all been good because there's been a sigh of relief on the markets, leading to a rally for many Asian stocks.
We'll see you then shortly in that case, Sharanjit. Now, before we go, I wonder, is it a little bit too early to mention Christmas yet? Well, we are in December, so hey, why not? Because we've got some fantastic pictures of an invasion of skiing and snowboarding. Santas, they took to the slopes of Newry in the US state of Maine. The event is staged every year to raise money for local charities. And as you can see, most of the father and mother, I have to stress Christmases, proved to be quite handy on the snow, even without a reindeer or a sleigh around to help. Never too early to talk about Christmas, is it, Sharanjit? From me and the team, thanks for watching Newsday. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Hello, more rain for parts of England and Wales in the day ahead. Tuesday quieter for all, but then the weather gets pretty busy again from Wednesday, as we will see. A chilly start the further north you are as Monday begins, and in Scotland a risk of ice on untreated surfaces because we had some wet weather overnight. It's cleared away, allowing temperatures to dip away. As we go on through the day, this is the area of clouds, some showers or outbreaks of rain moving through parts of England and Wales. It could produce some heavier bursts, squally winds, South Wales and southwest England to northernmost counties of northern England, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland will stay dry and sunny, though on the northerly breeze it's quite chilly here and there are further showers running into northern Scotland. Wintry in nature to relatively low ground as we go into the late afternoon evening, but a big range of temperatures, very mild again across South Wales and southern England with temperatures approaching the mid-teens. But on the northerly flow here, that colder air filters southwards across all parts through Monday night and into Tuesday morning. You'll notice still a few showers around in Scotland, wintry in nature, so dusting of snow possible here and there, and icy patches again as Tuesday begins. But it does look like a widespread frost is going to be the most noticeable part of Tuesday morning, and there could be a few fog patches around as well. So we know it's going to be cold as Tuesday begins, but there will be plenty of sunshine around. Now, temperatures will be held down into single figures despite the sunshine after that cold, frosty start, and this looks to be the coldest day of the week, more widely speaking. But then the weather is about to change once more. You notice an area of cloud and rain pushing into the far southwest. So whilst many stay dry during daylight hours, see some rain approaching Cornwall and Devon. And this next weather system, and this is the busier part of the weather week, starts to take its wet weather northwards across parts of England and Wales and into Northern Ireland on through Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. Hasn't finished there either. There's still some uncertainty about the northern extent, but it could also push into parts of Scotland. If it does so, we know there's some cold air in place here. We could see some snow, particularly on the hills out of that. And still a big range of temperatures from north to south across the UK. It's northern Scotland most likely to stay dry and avoid this weather system. But there will be another one coming in from the Atlantic as we go through Thursday, although the rain doesn't look particularly heavy. And then by the end of the week, a deepening area of low pressure promises more wet weather, but also stronger winds. It could be gales or severe gales in places as we go into Friday. So yes, looking pretty busy from Wednesday onwards, but it's particularly on Friday there is a risk of seeing some disruptive winds. Still chilly in the north, mild to the south. Bye-bye.
Now here's the science bit.
Ready.
Could a bendy phone be the future?
There really is no driver.
report.
Feel better for that.
Click. Saturday and Sunday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Sometimes being in the driving seat is... She stayed in school. She's a... This isn't just playing sports. This is... the simple act of standing, and you're a... You don't need superpowers to change the world. 100 Women. A season of inspiring and challenging stories across the BBC.
I'm Kash Madeira with BBC News. Our top story, global warming is posing a greater threat to humanity than ever before. That's according to the UN. Their climate chief said mankind was in danger of disappearing if temperatures continued to rise. Patricia Spinoza was speaking at the start of a climate conference in Katowice in Poland. Delegates will try to agree rules for how countries will meet commitments on cutting emissions. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have agreed to put their trade war on hold. At the G20 summit, the two leaders said they will postpone new US tariffs for 90 days. And this story is trending on BBC.com. A British couple have come forward to claim an engagement ring they dropped down a grate in New Times Square after a marriage proposal. The New York Police Department appealed for help and found the ring. That's all from me. Stay with us on BBC News. Our top story in the UK, the Environment Secretary Michael Gove says Theresa May's Brexit deal isn't perfect, but it is the only choice. Now let's cross over to Singapore for Asia Business Report.
Trade war truce. A relief rally as Asian stocks head higher after President Trump and Xi agreed to suspend new tariffs for 90 days to allow time for fresh talks. And oil pressure. Crude is also higher this morning on that US-China deal, and as Russia and Saudi Arabia extend their pact to manage prices ahead of a meeting of the world's biggest energy producers this week. Hello and welcome to Asia Business Report. I'm Sharanjeet Lail. Well, there's been a breakthrough over the weekend in the trade war between the world's two biggest economies. And that's as the presidents of both the US and China called a truce in the tit-for-tat imposition of tariffs on each other's countries. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping struck the deal during the G20 summit in Argentina as they held their first face-to-face meeting since the conflict erupted earlier this year. And of course, stocks are breathing a sigh of relief. It's being called a relief rally. In fact, they are considerably higher as a result of that news. Well, our business reporter, Monica Miller, has all the details, and she joins us now from the newsroom. Monica.
Yeah, investors here in Asia are breathing a sigh of relief after these two have decided to halt these tariffs for 90 days. Now, these details come from a memo from the White House. Originally, the U.S. was expected to ratchet up tariffs on more than $200 billion worth of Chinese goods from 10% to 25% in January. Now, as we can see here, China says that it will buy a very substantial amount of farm energy and industrial goods, although the amount wasn't specified, in order to reduce the trade gap with the United States. And the two sides will talk about the thorny issues of intellectual property theft and forced transfer of technology. Now, they set a deadline for 3 months to resolve these differences, or there'll be a new escalation of tariffs. Now, while the U.S. trade tensions were the focus mostly at the G20, Japan's finance minister Taro Aso told the BBC that there are other issues that the members of the G20 have to face.
As for the U.S., over half of its trade deficit is against China. Other countries such as Germany, Mexico and Japan, the U.S. has a trade deficit with them as well. However, they fall below 10%, 9% or 8%. That's why China stands out.
Now, despite all of these challenges, the G20 did manage to accomplish something that didn't happen at the APEC or ASEAN summits last month, and that was they came up with a communique that they all agreed on.
Well, that's always good to know. Thanks for that, Monica Miller, there in our newsroom. And to get the reaction from China now, the BBC's Robin Brandt joins me from Shanghai. Welcome to the show, Robin. Now, both sides, interestingly, are proclaiming wins from this. So who is the real winner? What's the view from there?
Well, the markets here like it as well, but I think what we've got is a 90-day ceasefire. What's been most interesting is some of the reporting here in China, state-run media. They are not mentioning some of the key gains, as it were, for the American side. I mean, there's no mention of this 90-day period in which negotiations are supposed to happen. No mention of the repeated threat of this 10 to 25% escalation in tariffs if there's no successful conclusion within that 90-day period. I mean, there's no mention in some of the Chinese state media either of this pledge to increase substantially, although the number is not defined, but to increase substantially acquisitions on the agricultural side, stuff like sorghum and soya as well. What we are seeing, I think, crucially as well, on the question of intellectual property and technology transfer, this is when the Americans are talking about an immediate pledge by both sides to negotiate now, and this really is the crux of the matter for many of the people around President Donald Trump. And yet in the Chinese reporting it talks about both sides agreeing to work towards a consensus. So two very different versions of what the conclusion of the agreement areas was. I think the crucial thing now is the 90-day period, and you know, there is relief for business here, but I think they're realistic about the prospect of getting a deal on some of those key issues about intellectual property, tech transfer in just 90 days. They don't think it's going to happen.
That's right. You mentioned those 90 days, and it's really crucial and also very interesting to see how it's being reported over there in China. But in reality, 90 days doesn't seem like quite enough to deal with the structural changes that the US wants China to make to its economy, those intellectual property protections, the issues around technology transfer. So in reality, what's going to happen next?
Well, look, remember, we've had a rest period before. We've had a 100-day ceasefire initiated by Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary in the US, and nothing substantial came of that. We found ourselves after that talking again about a big escalation in the trade war. I think, look, you're right, there's no way, no conceivable way really that China is suddenly going to concede on these big structural issues, made in China 2025, this industrial policy it pursues, market access, intellectual property and allegations, lengthy allegations, repeated allegations of the theft of intellectual property from American companies. What you might just get is a sense that the Americans are willing to believe that China is going to concede on some key issues, probably most likely market access. It will talk about enforcement on IP theft, but it's talked about that before. Perhaps the key thing that China can offer at the end of this 90-day period, which may mean there won't be a further escalation, is market access. But look, 3 months is not a lot of time, and I think there is a sense really that this is a ceasefire and they're preparing for further escalations 3 months down the line.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Robin Brandt there with the view from Shanghai. Now, for the business and economics calendar this week, here's what we're keeping an eye on as well. We'll be finding out how the world's 5th largest car maker is doing amid the trade war. Ford will announce its November sales later today. Australia is expected to leave the cost of borrowing at a record low of 1.5% for the 26th straight month. And on Wednesday, we've got India's central bank. It's going to be deciding whether to raise rates or not. It will also be the first time that its governor will face the media after falling out with the government last month. And US trade data comes out on Thursday, and we'll see if the trade friction that we've been talking about with China is having any impact on the American economy. And the week will end with November employment numbers coming out of the US. Will the labor market keep up its persistent strength is the question on everyone's lips. And of course, another major event taking place this week, the gathering of OPEC members and non-members in Vienna. Crude is trading higher this morning on the trade war truce between the US and China, and as Russia and Saudi Arabia have agreed to extend their pact to manage the market. However, we know Moscow and Riyadh haven't yet confirmed any fresh output cuts. Oil analyst John Driscoll told me what's at stake during this meeting.
High anxiety is correct, and also there's a degree of apprehension and maybe a sense of deja vu. The cartel, the OPEC Plus cartel, which now includes non-OPEC members, is about where they were 2 years ago. Increasing inventories, dropping prices, a need to forge a consensus and manage output. But the one important difference now is, well, two, is you got to question, is Saudi as influential as they were under this cloud of the Khashoggi affair? And the other one is the new wild card in the markets, the White House, President Trump, the tweets. This is having a major impact on market sentiment and market direction.
All right, and you're suggesting that the Saudis have less influence now, the U.S. much more?
Certainly the U.S. much more. If you look at what the U.S. has done with Iran, the hard line they've taken towards repealing the original deal, this helped to support prices. President Trump implored the Saudis to produce more oil, help balance markets. The Saudis fell for it. They put more oil into the markets, and then Trump did an about-face and announced that 8 would be exempted for 180 days. Market prices collapsed. And we also underestimated the robustness of the independent oil producers in the U.S. And their ability to bring oil to market.
And very quickly, we've seen these the prices, as you say, under all sorts of pressure. 20% decline in oil prices for November alone. So is the cartel and their partners under pressure to orchestrate further cuts?
They'll be under pressure to cut, but you got to think there's some dissension within the cartel because the Saudis and Russia responded to Trump's overture to increase output. Now they should be making most of the sacrifice.
And that was John Driscoll. Now, in other news, making business headlines, Standard Chartered is reportedly cutting jobs in Dubai and key markets, including Singapore, as it looks to curb expenses. According to Bloomberg News, as many as 100 positions may be cut in Dubai, although the number hasn't been finalized. It said that the layoffs also include leadership at the firm's priority banking operations, which offer personalized wealth management services. And Microsoft starts the world's most valuable listed company. On Friday, the technology giant reclaimed the #1 spot from Apple after more than 15 years. Microsoft ended the trading session with a market value of $851 billion. That's about $4 billion more than Apple. Let's take a look at those markets now. We told you how they were at the start of the program. Well, guess what? The Hang Seng is also seeing big gains there, really due to this relief rally following the G20 meeting between Trump and Xi over the weekend, where they decided to delay trade tariffs for another 90 days as they discuss the issue. And that's it for the program. Thanks for watching.
Our top stories this hour. The UN has warned the threat posed to all of us by climate change has never been this serious as the Global Climate Summit opens with a push to cut emissions. There's been a ceasefire in the trade war between the US and China as Donald Trump and Xi Jinping put punishing tariffs on hold. The international fashion brand Ted Baker has promised an independent investigation into allegations of what's described as forced hugging by its chief executive. Ray Kelvin is pictured here, and he usually chooses to be photographed not showing his face. Staff have begun an online petition accusing the 62-year-old founder of verbal, physical and sexual harassment, claims they say are entirely at odds with the company's values. Well, our business correspondent Joe Miller has more on this.
An anonymous petition was posted online just a few days ago, and it's already garnered around 2,000 signatures. And in it, employees at Ted Baker allege that the company's boss, Ray Kelvin, who took Ted Baker from a small stall in Glasgow selling shirts to a global fashion phenomenon, not only engages employees in unwanted embraces, but has also asked female staff if they would sit on his knee or whether he can massage their ears. They also say that he engages in sexual innuendo, and the creator of the petition says that when they went to the Human Resources Department to complain, they were told this is just what Ray is like. Now, Ted Baker has issued a statement, and in it says these allegations are not in step with the values of the company or the CEO, but they do say that hugging has become part of the culture at Ted Baker, even though it is always voluntary. And they say that the boss often greets people, whether they're shareholders or business partners or indeed colleagues, with a hug.
A family of Swans has been shot and killed in a suspected airgun attack. The bodies of 5 cygnets and their parents were discovered wrapped in plastic bags after they were thrown down the bank of a stream in the Kent village of Benenden. Well, Amy Oakleford from the RSPCA says airgun attacks are common.
It's really, really upsetting, and it's just disgusting that people think it's okay to do something like this. I mean, this is effectively a senseless attack on vulnerable animals, and it's just not okay. It's very strange for a whole family to be wiped out like this, and obviously elsewhere, and then potentially moved to this location, wrapped up in plastic bags. It's very bizarre. Unfortunately, air gun attacks is something we see a lot of at the RSPCA. Last year was actually a 5-year high for the number of reports we had of these sorts